On a morning somewhere in medieval Europe, the church bells were ringing, not to call people to Mass, but to announce something else entirely. Today, there would be an execution. Yet instead of fleeing in fear, hundreds of townspeople rushed eagerly toward the square, bringing bread, children, and an excitement that felt more like heading to a fair. On the wooden scaffold, a hooded figure stood silently in the early morning mist, waiting. From every stone street, the crowd kept growing, footsteps and whispers blending into one another. A mother carried a basket of bread while her curious child tugged at her hand, pulling her toward the gathering crowd. Why could a scene of death become entertainment for an entire society? That is the question we'll explore in this video. First, let's understand what a public execution in the Middle Ages actually was. It didn't take place quietly behind prison bars. It was organized like a ritual, with a fixed date and a fixed location, usually the town's central square or right outside the castle gate. The execution axe rested on the wooden block, and the executioner stood solemn and focused. The prisoner was led in chains, fear written plainly across his face. A row of guards stood watch near the town gate, while in the distance, towering castle spires cut into an overcast sky. A torch burned bright, and a priest in black robes held a wooden cross, his expression grave. This was a tool of the law, but at the same time, it was also a massive social event. The town square, in that moment, transformed into a true stage. A stone platform with a single wooden post at its center was built, right where the stone streets converged from every direction. The scaffold was raised high so that everyone could see, just like a theater stage. People poured in from every alley toward one focal point, some even climbing wooden fences to get a better view. In the church courtyard, a stone cross stood quietly beside the flat paved square. This was no coincidence. Authorities chose this spot deliberately to maximize the number of witnesses. From early morning, villagers had already gathered in great numbers. Some cheered with raised arms. An elderly man leaned on his cane and walked slowly. A woman in a headscarf carried a woven basket. Children squeezed between the legs of adults just to catch a glimpse of the scaffold. A man pointed dramatically toward the wooden stage, his mouth wide open in astonishment. The crowd packed shoulder to shoulder, filling the entire square, some covering their mouths in shock, others standing with arms crossed, eyes fixed and unwavering. The atmosphere felt more like a festival than a funeral. And wherever there's a crowd, there's commerce. Street vendors pushed carts piled high with bread and fruit toward the square. Canvas-covered stalls went up, coins changing hands back and forth. A loaf of bread, a woven basket laid out on a wooden table. A farmer in a straw hat, hoe in hand, smiled as he walked past the gathering. An execution, quite unintentionally, became an opportunity for the whole marketplace to earn money, no different from any other village fair day. The central figure of the entire event was the executioner. He walked slowly, wrapped in a dark cloak, his face hidden beneath a hood. Concealing his identity was partly to hide who he was, since the profession was widely despised, but it also unintentionally created an image full of mystery and drama. He raised the axe high above his head with a look of grim determination, then afterward wiped the blade clean with a cloth, his expression calm to the point of coldness. Every gesture, every step he took carried the weight of performance, watched closely by hundreds of unblinking eyes. Not every execution looked the same. Sometimes it was gallows with a noose swaying in the wind. Other times, it was an axe falling onto a wooden block. Each method carried its own kind of drama. Hanging drew out the suspense, while beheading was swift and instantly shocking. Over time, the crowd became something like seasoned spectators, debating and comparing different methods of execution as though watching a familiar play. Authorities always justified these events as a way to deter crime and teach morality to the public. Atop the castle wall, a lord stood looking down at the crowd below. A priest held his cross in prayer while a town crier read the sentence aloud before the people. But in truth, this was also a way for those in power to display their absolute authority, a performance of strength every bit as theatrical as its stated legal purpose. What made these events unique was that they gathered every layer of society together. From an elderly man wrapped in a gray cloak, to a hunter with a feathered hat, a woman in an orange dress carrying a basket, a boy in a blue tunic standing with folded arms, a blacksmith in a red apron holding a hammer, or a solemn priest in black. All of them stood in the very same stranger things still took place. A blood-stained scrap of cloth, a length of rope, was believed by many to bring good luck, even to cure illness. Some reached out to beg for a piece. Others quietly exchanged coins to obtain a fragment of the relic. An old woman clutched a piece of rope tightly to her chest, her eyes filled with superstitious hope. It was clear evidence that a scene of death had become both commercialized and wrapped in layers of superstition. Looking at this more broadly, none of it feels entirely unfamiliar. The Roman arena roaring with thousands of cheering spectators, modern bullfights, or even today's sensational news headlines and horror films, humans across every era seem drawn to that fragile boundary between life and death. A modern person's eyes fixed on a glowing phone screen aren't so different in the end from the eyes of that crowd standing before the scaffold centuries ago. Ultimately, public executions in the Middle Ages fulfilled the very same deep psychological need: drama, suspense, and the feeling of belonging to a community. But eventually, everything began to change. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Enlightenment thinking and humanitarian movements began spreading widely. Scholars sitting at wooden desks, candlelight flickering beside their books, gradually came to see public executions as barbaric, as a mark against civilization itself. Prison gates closed shut, cold stone walls replaced the noisy square. One by one, European nations moved executions behind four walls, bringing an end to an era in which death had served, for hundreds of years, as a public stage. Today, looking back at an empty execution square beneath the setting sun, we come to understand that medieval executions were never simply about justice. They were a complex social phenomenon, a blend of law, religion, power, economics, and a deep-seated human need for entertainment. And perhaps, in looking back at that history, we are also catching a glimpse of a reflection of ourselves today.